Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec and today we're going to learn how to play Under Falling Skies, which is a new solo game, specifically solo game from Czech Games Edition, designed by Tomáš Uhlíř. And the heart of the game is a campaign which you can find in the rule book and also in the box. However, the campaign uses the standard full game rules and the base game rules, which I'm going to explain in this video. So let's get started. For a first game, it's recommended that you start with this Roswell City tile. These two arrows and their orientation indicate which base tiles are needed and how they should be placed on the table. So in later games, if you would use New York, for example, the top base should be C base and the bottom one should be A. So when you have the city and the corresponding bases assembled, place this damage marker on the first space of this damage track. Place this energy marker on the space marked with this white circle. This green research marker on this space next to the city name. And this excavator to the space which is marked with this excavator icon and again the white semicircle. Then add 4 sky tiles, and if you place them all with this gray side up, it's the easiest difficulty level. And for each tile you flip to this red danger side, you increase the difficulty by 1. You can flip any number of tiles and you can flip any of those tiles. For the sake of explanation, we'll start with this setup. Finally, add the mothership with 5 purple ships on these drop points. Keep these 4 white ships nearby. Take these 5 grey and white dice. And this orange ship is not used in the standard game, it's used only in a campaign. And these blue dice are only used when you have the base tile with these blue spaces. I'll talk about those later in the video. The object of the game is to protect the city from the aliens. The game is played in rounds and each round has 3 phases. In the first phase, the dice phase, you will place dice in your base and then move the ships in the corresponding column towards the city. In the second phase, you will use these dice on your base to perform actions from that base. You will have a chance to shoot these enemy ships. You will move your excavator towards the bottom of the base to make more of these rooms available for your dice. For that you will need to gain some energy and you will have to perform the research and move this research marker upwards on this track, because when you reach the top of the track you win the game. In the third phase, the mothership will descend 1 space towards the city. That may trigger some negative effects from the corresponding row. And then if there are any ships on the mothership, they will respawn. To win the game, you must reach this top space of the research track with your research marker. Otherwise, if this damage marker reaches this last space with the skull, or if the mothership reaches the same space with the skull over here, you immediately lose the game. At the start of the dice phase, first, roll all 5 dice. Then, one by one, you will take a die from the pool, place it in one of the spaces on your base. Then, all ships in the same column will move down towards the city. Then you would immediately resolve the effect of the spaces where the purple ships or white ships end their movement. And then you can take another die and repeat the whole process. When you take the white die, after placing the white die, you must reroll all dice that were not placed yet. When placing dice, you can place maximum 1 die in each column. And I'm saying it's a column, although I'm demonstrating the game in the horizontal position to make sure it fits into the camera frame. But thematically, this is the ground and this is the sky, so it should be placed vertically. So you must have exactly 1 die in each column. And by placing these dice, you are planning your actions for the next phase. Don't take those actions yet. There is a gray line which runs behind all these rooms and has these little yellow arrows, and this line indicates the direction in which the excavator moves. All spaces which are behind this excavator are excavated. All spaces in front of it are unexcavated. You can have maximum 1 die in this unexcavated area. In addition, the value of the die must be equal or greater to the number of spaces between the excavator and that die. In this example we have 4 spaces, so the die value must be 4 or higher. It is perfectly okay to place a die in this empty tunnel. The die would not do anything there, but if you want, you can do it. You move the enemy ships immediately after placing a die in your base. You move the ship number of spaces equal to the value of the die, so in this case it's 4. Then you immediately resolve any effects where the ship ends the movement. The only exception are these spaces with this -1 number at the top. Those spaces don't do anything other than reducing the value of the die placed there. So in this example, this ship only moves 2 spaces. Now this arrow indicates that it has to move over here. If there's more than 1 ship in the corresponding column, move the lowest ship first, then the next lowest ship, and so on and so forth. If you use the die with value 1 on these spaces, the enemy ships from that column don't move. Now let's take a look at these immediate effects which get triggered when the enemy ship ends the movement on those spaces. When the ship lands on this mothership icon, the entire mothership moves 1 space down without triggering this effect. When the ship ends the movement on these arrows, it moves in the direction of that arrow immediately. If that space would be occupied, the ship stays where it is. If the ship ends the movement on one of these explosion spaces, there is actually no immediate effect, but these ships may be destroyed during the room phase where player resolves the dice. When you trigger this effect and you have to move the mothership 1 space down, and there are any ships on that particular row, those ships are placed back on the mothership and they will be respawned later during the mothership phase. Whenever the enemy ship reaches the city, in this case all ships in this column have to move 5 spaces down, so both of these ships will reach the city. For each ship, move this damage marker 1 space down, so for 2 ships it would go 2 spaces down, and then all these ships are returned back to the mothership, including the white ships. In the rooms phase, you will resolve dice in these rooms. You can resolve them in any order you want, and after resolving, remove the die from the room. You must fully resolve one room before you resolve another room, so you may not combine values from multiple rooms into one single effect. However, in these multi-space rooms, in order to trigger that effect, all spaces of the room must have dice, and then you combine the values of all those dice for one single effect. However, if at least one space of such a room is empty, such room would not be triggered. If you have a die in a room with these energy symbols, for each energy symbol you must spend 1 energy. Only then you can trigger the effect of that room. If you don't have the energy or if you don't want to spend the energy, you can simply remove the die without triggering the effect. Some rooms alter the value of the die placed in these rooms. In this case, the value of the die is reduced by 1. The value is only reduced for triggering the effect. Enemy ships would still move by 6 spaces. In this example, when you add these die values together, the sum has to be reduced by 3. So the value of this room would be 5 plus 4 is 9, minus 3, 6. Any die placed in these anti-aircraft gun rooms doesn't do anything except for reducing the movement of enemy ships by 1. So we can simply remove the die from that room and continue to the next room. Similarly, you can place a die in this empty tunnel as well. It doesn't do anything, but sometimes it may be needed. However, these spaces don't provide any effect, so you can simply remove the die and continue to the next room. When you trigger these yellow spaces, you gain energy equal to the value of that room. So in this case, 5 plus 4 is 9, minus 3 is 6. And if you would get more than 7 any excess value is lost. Again, remove the dice after triggering the effect. When you resolve these green spaces, you can advance on the research track. In order to advance to the next space, the value of the die must be equal or higher than the value of that space. In this example, the value of the die is 3, so I can move to the next research space. Obviously, in this case, I have to spend 2 energy. Now, you can move more than one space with one die. This die has a value 6 minus 1, that is 5. So in order to move to this space, it's 1 point, plus 3, 4 points, plus 1, 5 points. So with 5 points from this die, I can move 3 spaces on this research track. When resolving these red rooms, the jet fighter rooms, you can destroy enemy ships which are located on these explosion spaces. So not on any spaces, but only on these explosion spaces. You can only destroy the ship if the value of the room is equal or higher than the value of the explosion space. In this example, the value of the jet fighter room is 5, so this ship will be destroyed, this one as well, but this one not, because the value of the explosion space is 6, which is higher than 5. When you destroy the purple ship, it is returned back to the mothership. Since this one is also on the explosion space and the value is lower or equal than the jet fighters, this purple ship is also destroyed and returned to the mothership. Now, when you destroy white ship, it is removed from the board and placed next to the game board. That means it will not be respawned at the end of the mothership phase. And finally, when you resolve the die which is in front of the excavator, so in an unexcavated space, you don't resolve the effect of the room, you simply remove the die and move the excavator. Then in the next phase, the Mothership phase, Mothership moves one space down or one row down. If there are any ships, any enemy ships on that row, those are placed back on the Mothership as well. Then, after advancing the Mothership, resolve the effect which is in the same row, if there is any. This effect indicates that you have to add one white ship to the mothership. This effect means that you have to move the excavator one space backwards. In this space it would be 2 spaces backwards. This symbol indicates that you have to move your research marker one space backwards. And when the mothership would descend to this row, this icon indicates that you have to take 1 damage. Remember that these effects are only triggered in the Mothership phase. In the dice phase, when you place dice in your base and you move the enemy ships down, and that triggers the movement of the Mothership, these side effects are not triggered. So if you would manage to move your research marker to this space, which costs 7 research points, and you see that if Mothership moves to this row during the Mothership phase, you have to move that research marker 1 space back. You can deliberately move one of the enemy ships to this Mothership move effect, then move the Mothership without triggering that effect. Then at the end of the Mothership phase, you respawn all the enemy ships which are on the Mothership. Always respawn the purple ships first, and only then you respawn white ships. When respawning the ships, always place them to empty columns first. So the first one would go here, then we have another empty column over here. Then if all the columns contain at least 1 enemy ship, the next ship will be respawned to the column where there's the longest distance to the nearest ship. So it would be over here. Then the last ship can go into either of these 2 columns because both ships are equal distance from the mothership. Then you can choose where to place the next ship. If all drop points would contain at least 1 ship and there's still any ship remaining on the mothership, that ship would remain there and would be respawned at the end of the next turn. You lose the game immediately when this damage marker reaches the last space with the skull, or similarly when the mothership reaches this row again with the skull. You can win the game only if your research marker reaches the last space on this research track. Reaching this last space usually takes a lot of research points, and that means you have to use this double or even this triple room at the end of your base. That's the reason why you need to move the excavator from the starting position towards the bottom of the base. In your next games, you can choose different cities, and each city has a special ability. Each city also has a different combination of these arrows and letters, so that means your bases will also look differently, and each base has a different starting energy, different damage track, and also different starting spaces for the research track. Now, when you lose the game with this city, you can play the next game with the same city, but the city is partially damaged, and that makes people more resilient, so the special ability of the city is stronger. These blue rooms are robot rooms. When you place any white or a gray die in this robot space, place the blue die with the same value as the value of that room. In this example, it's 5 minus 1, so value 4, in any empty excavated space. When you place it, rotate it by 45 degrees to indicate that it's exhausted, so you may not use this die this turn. And when placing the die, don't move any ships in that column. Now, these blue dice are never rolled, they always stay where they are, and at the start of the round, rotate them back to indicate that you can now use them this turn. And during the dice phase, place these white and gray dice as if there was no blue die present. So you still have to place one white or one gray die in each column. Those blue dice basically don't count. However, if you need, you can remove them anytime during the dice phase and potentially place a different die in that space. Now, during the rooms phase, when you trigger those room effects, blue dice trigger those effects as any other die. So in this example, this blue die would add 4 plus 1, 5 research points. Then don't remove that blue die from the space, reduce the value by 1 and exhaust that die. At the end of the phase, when you resolve all the dice, refresh the blue dice so that they can be used in the next turn. When the blue die has a value 1 and it has to be reduced by 1, it is removed from the base. If the mothership moves and triggers this effect which moves the excavator back, if the excavator buries the blue die, remove it from the base. Blue die can only be in any excavated space. So that's how we play Under Falling Skies, at least the base game, the full base game rules. The game obviously contains the campaign, and you can find the introduction to the campaign in the rulebook. And each campaign has its own scenario, all the instructions, and I'm not going to talk about those. I will leave it up to you to discover the campaign. Anyway, if you have any questions or comments to the rules, I'll be happy to answer those questions. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page. My name is Branislav Berec. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell, and hope to see you next time.